Run, run, run! Taking this hit will kill me! Every cell in Kibutsuji Muzan's body screamed a warning. He had meant to fight while looking for a way out, but now his memory hung in tatters. He could only obey the animal panic flooding him. He began to divide himself, one moment whole, the next split into 1,800 pieces. Natsume Yu's eyes narrowed. He tightened his grip on the Nichiren blade and swung. One downward slash cut through dozens of flesh fragments. An upward slash, a third. His blade moved in a blur. The speed was beyond the eye to follow. The crimson arc became almost a ball of red light. The rushing air churned hot and fierce. Even the pillars watching dozens of meters away felt the heat. From a distance, it looked like the sun was setting. High-speed sword? Has he learned that move? Dinessa stared at Natsume Yuu in surprise. The technique was the same she had used to tear Kokushibo and Akaza apart. Condense Yuki in the arm and release it. The more Yuki released, the stronger the slash and the faster the sword. If Dinessa used it at full power, those nearby wouldn't see the draw of her sword, only demons falling in her path. Now she felt a surge of energy gathering on Natsume Yuu's right arm, the same sensation as Yuki. He was indeed using the high-speed sword. His eyes haven't changed. His appearance hasn't changed, she thought, envy flickering across her face. Even as a female greatsword, with a higher tolerance for the pleasure that releases Yuki, she knew the danger. If the Yuki release reached its limit, one's consciousness could be swallowed, and they could turn into a demon or an abyssal one. For Natsume Yuu to wield that power freely without visible side effects was astonishing. But, if he could not withstand it, turning into an abyssal one would be a disaster. Suddenly the wonder in Dinessa's eyes cooled into dread. The flesh fragments had not flown far after the initial onslaught. Natsume Yuu kept slicing until only one fragment remained. Watching it try to escape, he suddenly stopped and let the corner of his mouth lift. He snapped his fingers. Buildings ahead of them stretched and joined, forming a long corridor. The corridor's far end, impossibly, transformed to align with Natsume Yuu's position. Nakimi's Infinity Castle. If trapped inside, even a weak combatant could make defeat nearly impossible. The fragment, propelled only by inertia, had no leverage to alter its course once the landscape redirected it. It flew straight into the corridor, and the corridor led to Natsume Yuu. "Then let's die together." Muzan snarled. He abandoned caution. Though his body had not fully regenerated, he seized control of his own blood with his will and forced it into Nakime. With his next thought, he killed her. Boom. The normally stable Infinity Castle emitted a strange, shuddering sound. Buildings vibrated, some collapsing into dust. The pocket dimension was destabilizing. "This pocket dimension is collapsing." Kikyo was the first to notice, and she spoke calmly. With her power, she could break through the pocket dimension, but she hesitated. She didn't know where outside the pocket dimension lay. If it opened into the sea or underground, escape would be difficult. "If this place collapses, what will happen to us?" Rengoku Shinjiro asked, unsettled. "In the worst case, we die," Kikyo said quietly. Her words were a cold truth. "Don't say that so freely," Uzui Tengen snapped, covering his face with a hand. We should leave." Kato Megumi called without panicking. At Natsume Yuu's signal, they moved. The moment they reappeared on the ground, a deafening bang rolled out. Muzan, brought back with them, reformed in an instant and shot away at impossible speed. "If your fighting will had been this strong before, you might have made me use my full power," Muzan hissed as he fled. Natsume Yuu only shook his head, watching the fleeing figure. "Kikyo, seal him, temporarily." "Understood." Kikyo didn't ask for details. She knocked an arrow to her wooden bow and saturated it with sacred energy. With a sharp whistle, the bolt streaked like a white meteor, striking Muzan before he could vanish into the forest. The force drove him against a tree and pinned him there. Muzan reached for the arrow, trying to pull it free, but felt an opposing force resisting his touch. He glared at the Miko, lowering her bow, and roared in frustration. Although he was not a demon, he'd split himself once, and his body still bore the scorching slashes Natsume Yuu had left. Slashes like searing fire, all over him. Suppressing them took enormous effort. He had no spare strength to pry out a sealing arrow. If Yoriichi Tsukikuni had once scarred him, Natsume Yuu's slashes were now a network across his body, forcing him to expend power non-stop to keep from tearing himself apart. He couldn't free himself from Kikyo's seal. A bellow tore out of him as he abandoned the attempt to suppress the burning wounds. Chapter 182, Section 180. As soon as the power was released, deep, bone-piercing scars appeared all over his body. A heat like scorching sunlight seared his flesh. Red light welled up from the wounds as if he were about to burst into flame and die on the spot. Kibutsuji Muzan gritted his teeth against the agony. His body ballooned as if it wanted to explode outward, but the arrow embedded in his chest suddenly flared with a blinding white light. Spiritual energy pressed down on Muzan with an overwhelming force, forcing his swelling form to contract. Even though their systems were different, when it came to raw power they were the same. He found he could not break free. The light along his body intensified, the baking sensation grew clearer, and a taste of death crawled through his limbs. Muzan fought to staunch the wounds, fury and fear mingling in his roar. Damn the Demon Slayer Core! Damn humanity! I am the perfect creature destined to be a god. How could I fall here? Natsume Yuu ignored his outburst and inclined his head toward Kikyo. Thank you. Kikyo slung her longbow over her back, her face composed. Her curt reply made the corners of Sanemi Shinazugawa and the other pillars twitch with wounded pride. But after seeing the power she'd displayed pulling that arrow free and firing it, none of them could argue with her right to be so calm. I'll leave him to you. Natsume said little else and turned to Butterfly Kanai. Leave him to us? Butterfly Kanai stared, stunned, at Muzan pinned to the tree in the distance. Natsume's proposal had caught her off guard. Until now, their only plan had been to kill Muzan. No one had seriously considered whether they would be the ones to finish him. The 1,000-year grudge between the Demon Slayer Corps and the demons. Let you, the members of the Corps, resolve it. Natsume's gaze swept over the pillars. Whether he personally killed Muzan was not of great importance to him. But letting the descendants of the Demon Slayer Corps end the centuries-old conflict gave the victory a proper beginning and end. Rengoku Shinjiro and the other pillars visibly brightened at the words. Being the ones to settle the root of this disaster held a special meaning for them. Previously, Muzan's overwhelming strength had made the idea feel impossible, and to ask strangers to capture him alive and then hand him over for them to finish felt shameful. They hadn't expected Natsume to think of it. Gratitude stirred in their chests. Even Butterfly Kanai's expression softened. Kikyo's icy gaze showed a hint of warmth. In his current state, can we move him? Himejima Jome asked, hands clasped respectfully. If the Demon Slayer Corps were to handle this, they did not plan to simply watch. My sealing arrow, combined with Natsume Yuya's slash, will hold him. Even after a few hundred years, he won't be able to break free, Kikyo said calmly, neither boasting nor minimizing the truth. The injury was irrecoverable, and the spiritual energy suppression ensured that, as long as she didn't withdraw the arrow herself, the Demon King would never escape that seal in his lifetime. Still, she tempered her certainty. The world's future might bring technological developments she couldn't foresee, so she held back a little. What a dramatic seal. Thank you. Uzui Tengen said with a flash of delight, his gratitude theatrical but sincere. Transporting him back would be simple. Cut the tree down and carry it. After the recent battle, they had plenty of strength left. It would be like bringing a trophy, the tree with Muzan still impaled, as proof. Even if they were dying, the pillars would muster enough to carry that trunk home. All right, the matter is settled. I should head back now, Natsume said. Shiramine Risa and the others were still waiting for him to log on. Me too, Chitanda Eru added softly, raising her hand. I should go as well, Dinessa said, smiling gently like an older sister. Those who had witnessed her fighting stance knew she was far from harmless. She had found a safe place for Claire, and she worried about leaving the girl alone. Now that things were over, she had to return quickly. The organization already knew about the bandits they'd killed and had prepared to send greatswords to hunt her. If she weren't with Claire, the greatswords might not care about a small girl, but Dinessa had been tainted by demonic power, and they might not let her go easily. If she hadn't checked thoroughly and detected no trace of demon power within a few kilometers, she never would have come. One by one, Doma Umaru and the others decided to leave as well. The most important matter had been resolved. they wouldn't take part in the remaining excitement. After the battle, their blood had cooled, leaving them feeling weak and nauseated. Their bodies trembled slightly. They planned to go home, rest, or log into the game to vent and steady their nerves. Butterfly Kane watched them go and could not hide the sorrow on her face. She felt deeply guilty for dragging those innocent girls into blood and violence. "I'm sorry for involving you. It's not your fault. This was our choice," Kato Megumi said, gently patting Kane's shoulder. "Since we encountered the chat group, as long as you choose to walk this path, things like this are hard to avoid." She gave a small, sad smile. And they weren't people to begin with. They were monsters, no different from the monsters in the games. Chapter 183, Section 183. When she saw the scene, Doma Umaru spoke up, unable to hide her distaste. "No, those monsters from the game are all cuter than these demons." A soft complaint escaped Chitanda Eru. The monsters in the game had been adjusted to be more palatable. They didn't look revolting. These demons, however, grew however they pleased. There was no hesitation when they started fighting. The sight of torn flesh, the blood that flowed, the thick, metallic scent, none of that existed in the game. That was what made it so hard to bear. "That's what they said," Natsume Yuu replied calmly, glancing at Butterfly Kane. "I understand. Thank you." Continuing to argue would have been to deny what the girls had done, so Butterfly Kane composed herself and spoke seriously. "Then I'll take my leave first." Natsume Yuu, who had been holding a Nichiren blade, tossed it back to Rengoku Shinjiro, opened the group chat, and began transmitting. White spirals of light appeared one by one behind the gathered people. Earlier, because they knew Butterfly Kane was calling for help, they had all gathered in a single world. That was why only one portal had appeared before. Now each was returning home, so more portals opened. They watched the white spirals dissipate. "Don't go, you bastards!" Kibutsuji Muzan shouted wildly as the figures vanished. "Pull these damned arrows out of me! I curse you all to die horribly." Uzui Tengen looked over the ruined valley and at the disappearing silhouettes, feeling as if he were still dreaming. If Muzan weren't sealed right before them, he might have thought the whole thing unreal. The Ghost King, the enemy they'd never been able to find, captured so easily. If it weren't for their help, dealing with him would have been truly difficult. Sanemi Shinazugawa muttered as he took 2 vials of green liquid from inside his clothes and stared at them. The toxins, Tamayo's work, could suppress Muzan's regenerative splitting and destroy his cells. The pillars had carried them as a last resort, prepared to force the poison on themselves if needed. They had never intended to use them, and yet, after witnessing what had just happened, even those poisons might not have been enough. "Once we get back, let's talk with the master about how to repay them," Rengoku Shinjiro said, scratching his head with a relaxed smile. Muzan was captured, his wife had recovered, and his son no longer had to fight demons. Since learning the truth about this world, Rengoku's heart had never felt so light. "We'll prepare properly and invite them again later." Butterfly Kane smiled brightly. "Let's make sure he stays quiet." Himejima Jome turned his calm gaze toward Muzan. Tomioka Jiyu walked forward in silence. A ragged cloth appeared in his hand. When he reached the tree that held Muzan, he stuffed the cloth into his mouth, drew his Nichiren blade, and cut the trunk above and below the pinned section. Only the log containing Muzan remained. Without a word, Tomioka hoisted the captive onto his shoulder. "Compared to the burden of being a pillar, you are quite light," he said in a strange, casual tone. Muzan's face twisted in confusion at the remark. After that, he fell silent. Small noises escaped his throat as he stared up at the moon. The scenery moved past him, but he felt as if he were being sent to hell. His chest surged. Fear, anger, panic, all churned in his eyes. He struggled frantically, but it did nothing. Helplessness crept in. In that state, Muzan wondered about the eyes of the humans he had killed. Had they looked like his now at the end? There was no way to ask them. More than an hour later, in the courtyard of the Demon Slayer Corps headquarters, many uniformed members stood gathered. Their gazes fell on Kibutsuji Muzan, nail pinned to the log in the center. "Is this the Ghost King? I didn't expect it to go this smoothly. As long as he dies, won't all demons die with him? This world might finally become one without demons." "Master has arrived. Make way." The murmurs swelled into an angry hush as Kagaya Ubuyashiki entered, a faint abnormal redness marking his forehead. Amane Ubuyashiki walked beside him, hands clasped, and behind them came a slightly thin, middle-aged man. When Muzan saw the earrings and the mark on Kagaya's forehead, images burned deep in his memory, his pupils tightened. Ugh! His agitation changed the sound escaping his throat. Kibutsuji Muzan, the enmity between you and our Demon Slayer Corps has finally ended, Kagaya said steadily, refusing to have him unbound. Seeing the enemy he had always longed to meet, Kagaya felt no desire for cruel words, only endless relief. The children have much they want to do to you, so I won't waste any more words, he added. Everyone, do as you please, but be careful with the arrows. They are sealing objects. Kagaya had no wish to humiliate Muzan personally, but the Corps carried profound resentment. They had joined for this day. At Kagaya's allowance, the gathered members suddenly surged. Die! Some cast hungry, wolfish looks at Muzan. Others rushed forward with tears in their eyes. Those below the Kanoe rank couldn't deal mortal wounds, but striking and kicking him was a way to vent years of hatred. Even so, they kept Kagaya's warning in mind. He narrowly avoided the arrows flying for his chest. The onslaught continued until the sun finally crested the distant horizon. Light struck the front of the tree stump that pinned him, and, imperceptibly at first, his body began to crawl forward. Muzan Kibutsuji, who had believed the ordeal nearly over, grew frantic. Fear clawed at him, reaching a new peak. His body twisted violently. Had the trunk not been fixed in place, he would have toppled. I prepared something for you a long time ago. I'll give it to you now, a voice said. When the Demon Slayer Corps members had finally dispersed, Butterfly Kanae stepped forward. She pulled the cloth away from his mouth and drew a small bottle from her bosom. The liquid inside was the color of fresh blood. Spare, Muzan tried to speak. Before he could finish, Kanae thrust the bottle into his mouth. The red liquid poured down his throat. Blood? Muzan's face registered recognition for a heartbeat, then disbelief. The moment even a single drop entered him, his cells began collapsing. Death rushed through him. His famed regeneration faltered and failed. Dark blotches surfaced across his skin and expanded with terrifying speed. What is this? Muzan shrieked, panic stripping his composure. The sensation that overwhelmed him was the same ominous aura they had all felt before, an aura of death, the very antithesis of life. It struck him harder than the distant sun ever had. If the sun was his physical weakness, this was the enemy of existence itself. Just touching it, whether in body or soul, meant instantaneous decay. Muzan, ancient and proud, trembled. As sunlight washed over him, his body turned to black ash and dissolved into thick white smoke. Chapter 113, The Portal Experiment. Carrying Claire on her back, Danessa moved through mountains and forest with startling speed. Her silver eyes were slightly unfocused as she sent a sliver of her consciousness into the chat group and asked, uncertain, can the chat group take people with it when it travels? Last night, Claire had come through without mishap, but Danessa couldn't be sure what would happen next. It was time to find a safer refuge for Claire. Now that she knew both demons and the greatswords had been subjects of the organization's experiments, she refused to let Claire suffer that fate. The continent outside the island was overrun with demons under the organization's banner, and continual war made it no safe haven. That left other worlds as the only option. Her parents had been dead for years. She had no close friends here. Claire was the only person she cared about. The only reason Danessa had stayed in this world so far was to fight the organization and to free the greatswords from its control. If we can travel together, that would make me a lot more comfortable, Saiko Busujima said. Over time, she and Shizuka Marikawa had become friendly, and Saiko hoped she might take Shizuka with her if she ever had to leave. Miss Danessa, Doma Umaru added, it would be inconvenient to take a child along the way. I'm curious too, Chitanda Eru chimed in. Yotsuya Miko leaned forward. Do you have anyone you'd want to bring with you? Doma shook his head. I don't want to involve my friends. I'm just curious about the chat group's functions. Same, Chitanda agreed. After what had happened the night before, both of them knew how a single mistake in some worlds could be fatal. For safety's sake, they didn't want to drag others into this. Kato Megumi had no close friends to involve, so she stayed out of the debate. I see, Yotsuya said softly, resolution crossing her features. She had been uncertain about telling Hanari Yurikawa and taking her along, but the group's caution made her reconsider immediately. Last night's stream, I noticed the demons and the Demon Slayer Corps seemed to have detected the portal, Kirigiri Kyuko observed. As a detective and an outsider watching Butterfly Kanai's world, she'd paid attention to the surrounding reactions and had noted changes in expression as events unfolded. I didn't expect it would cause such a stir. Dinessa smiled faintly. It seems everyone has their own concerns. Chitanda tilted her head. If one sees the portal, what happens? Natsume Yuu answered. It means there might be a chance to make contact. But judging from the gaming equipment involved, traveling probably requires approval from someone who has the chat group, she added. At that suggestion, Dinessa's and Saiko's eyes brightened. Kikyo spoke up, blunt and practical. Do you want to test it? There's no substitute for verification in person, she meant. Kato Megumi protested. If it doesn't work, we don't know what could happen. The room sobered. Whoever was told the secret of world crossing had to be trusted utterly. In uncertain circumstances, no one wanted to gamble on letting an uninformed person attempt it, no matter how unlikely a bad outcome seemed. Natsume said, Kikyo, Dinessa, you two could find either yukai or wild beasts. Kirigiri added, Yukai have consciousness. They might be more telling. Doma brightened. Exactly. If humans can't go, use substitutes. There are vengeful spirits all over my side, Yotsuya offered. If a vengeful spirit originates from a human, testing with it would be more accurate, Kato suggested. Kikyo hesitated. But if a vengeful spirit dies in another world, we can't be sure whether it can move on to the afterlife. As a priestess, she had the duty to purify such spirits. She didn't want to doom someone who hadn't committed wrongdoing. As for demons and yukai, she continued, they exist by preying on people. I wouldn't complain about using them. That's something I overlooked, Kato admitted. Then I'll trouble the two of you, Natsume said decisively. Either demons or yukai will do. Dinessa let the words sit with her for a moment and murmured, Demons, huh? Chapter 185, Section 185. Dinessa did not stop walking, but at that moment her senses flared to life. A few demons hid in the village 3 kilometers ahead. Lucky, she thought, a smile brightening her face. Leave it to me. I can sense their demonic energy. She sent a quick message in the group chat. Claire, hold on tight. Then she glanced back at the girl and felt Claire grip her cloak tighter. A thunderous crack split the air. Dinessa's body became an arrow, launching forward at impossible speed. Her golden hair streamed behind her. Claire was pressed flat to Dinessa's back, the wind whistling in her ears, confusion wide in her eyes. In an instant, the village 3 kilometers away leapt before them. All right, you can get down now. Dinessa eased Claire down and took her hand as they approached the village. Whispers and frightened, disdainful looks met them at the gate. Why is the silver-eyed witch here? People have been going missing. Could there be a demon? She's brought a human child with her? Who would be brave enough to stand near the silver-eyed witch? They spread out cautiously. No one wanted trouble. Dinessa had been used to this. She walked on without paying them much mind. Claire glared at the villagers, then slipped her hand into Dinessa's. Feeling the warmth of Claire's palm, Dinessa lowered her head. Those steady, worried eyes stirred something she had not felt in a long time. She had brought Claire because she knew the girl was different from ordinary people, but now, touched by that concern, Dinessa accepted her fully. I'm fine. She reached up and stroked Claire's head. No matter what, I'll stay by your side, Claire said softly, calm and resolute. Dinessa smiled, not the empty smile she'd worn so often. Each greatsword had unique techniques. Dinessa's greatest gift was her perception of demonic energy. Her sensitivity let her anticipate an opponent's next move, to dodge or counter before the strike came. Even with a demon concealing its aura, she could still detect its location. They pushed into the village center, and more residents, warned by the rumors of the silver-eyed witch's arrival, spilled into the square. Dinessa halted and put on that composed expression. Then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. A sudden tearing sound came from the crowd like cloth ripping. A foul smell spread. The witch killed someone cried, and a voice screamed in terror as people scattered. Dinessa flashed through the fleeing bodies like lightning and already stood before a woman who had been trying to flee. Her silver eyes were calm as an old well. She moved as if slicing melon, not ending lives. The demon the woman had become had been preparing. Its demonic energy surged. Pupils flickered gold, lips split to reveal fangs, skin paled to a sickly gray-green, veins bulged, fingers lengthened and curled with razor nails. "I can't," it began, but Danessa was already past it. Its vision collapsed to the sides, consciousness slipping away. The ground shuddered with the force of the blow and cracked beneath them. Danessa stopped, blade inverted, and at its tip lay a demon with severed limbs. Its golden eyes stared up at the sword with raw, animal fear, the blade pinned through its mouth so it could not cry out. "Demon," someone shouted. "They're demons? I had dinner at her house last week." Another voice trembled. "How could Aaliyah be a demon?" A man stood frozen, unable to accept that the woman with whom he shared a bed was gone, replaced by this thing. Someone ventured an explanation. After a demon eats a brain, it absorbs memories. That's why people didn't recognize them. The comment hung in the air. Neighbors murmured in shock and sorrow. Danessa said nothing. She had read different reports in the organization's files. The official line was a lie. Demons did not magically eat memories. The organization had been implanting the flesh and blood of dragons' descendants into ordinary people. Those bodies, unable to withstand the demonic energy, lost their humanity and developed new consciousnesses, turning into demons. The memory story had been spread to cover that truth, but this was not the time to expose it. These villagers were powerless. If the organization learned the truth here, they would answer with force. Danessa had heard the local tales once. Villages that refused to pay the eradication levies ended up destroyed by demons. She had already begun to doubt the organization before, and now she knew its darkness ran deeper than she had imagined. That knowledge had once made her gullible in other ways, but she would not reveal it here. "Claire, let's go." With a flick of her wrist, Danessa lifted the demon impaled on her blade. She smiled at the girl. Hunting the demons was only part of the reason she had come. The rest of their business would wait. The main reason for staying was still to test the teleportation portal. Claire made a soft, admiring sound, her small face turned up toward Danessa. Who posted the bounty? How do we pay?" A few villagers who had seen the two preparing to leave hurried over, curiosity written on their faces. They ignored the demon on Danessa's blade. After all, what did a demon's life matter to them? Danessa, for her part, didn't answer at once. Finally, she said without looking back, "It was my whim." She had always had the organization's men in black collect the coin after a hunt, but she had already left them. She couldn't very well call them herself now, and she was impatient to test the portal's limits. She didn't want to wait for the villagers to scrape together a reward. A ripple of surprised, grateful voices rose. "Really? Maybe the Greatsword is a kind person. They're not taking a reward? This winter will be a little easier at least." Faces around her softened with relief. Their village was poor. The price for killing a demon was steep. If the bounty had been demanded, some families might have starved. That was why they'd hesitated to contact the organization in the first place. Claire watched the demon being carried away, and when they were out of the villager's sight, asked quietly, "Danessa, why are you taking it?" "There's something I want to try. Don't be scared no matter what you see, okay?" Claire nodded, curiosity and excitement shining in her eyes. Danessa found a secluded spot, and after checking that there was no leaking demonic energy, opened her chat group. "I've captured the demon. Where should I teleport?" "Miss Danessa is so fast. It's only been a little over 10 minutes, right? Come to my side. My world's pretty chaotic. Better than theirs." "Anywhere is fine." They hadn't expected her to be so quick. Psycho's voice stood out. She was bold enough to invite Danessa into her world. Danessa didn't object. This was only a test. A white vortex formed in front of her. Remembering how precise her control needed to be, Danessa covered her mouth and watched. She first set the portal to deny the demon passage with her. The vortex looked solid, but when she pushed the demon forward, it slid straight through and appeared behind the portal as if the opening were a window. Then Danessa pulled it back. This time she set the portal to allow the demon to accompany her. She shouldered the greatsword and walked forward. Claire opened her mouth to follow, then stopped. In an instant, Dinessa and the demon disappeared into the light. They came out into a courtyard. A woman stood nearby and greeted them with a calm, "Hello." She had long purple hair tied high and wore a tight, practical outfit. A stern, efficient aura hung around her. Dinessa sensed the same unusual breathing technique she'd noticed on 3 others, including Doma Umaru. "Hello, I'm Dinessa," she replied, bowing slightly. Saiko Busujima's dark blue eyes glittered as they traveled down to the demon on Dinessa's sword. There was excitement there, not disgust. Dinessa's own silver eyes swept over Saiko, quick and assessing. Having been in countless fights, she read people fast. This woman's expression told her something important. "She has great potential as a warrior," Dinessa said. She meant it, she wasn't repelled. The demon was reduced to body and head. Dinessa had cut off its limbs to make it easier to control. As Natsume said, she added, "Only what I permit comes with me. If I don't allow it, it simply passes through on its own." Saiko's smile widened. Relief and excitement showed on her face. The situation outside hadn't improved. If anything, it had worsened. Fewer screams now meant fewer survivors, not peace. "Can I look outside?" Dinessa asked, curiosity pricking at her. Even before she arrived, she'd heard in the distance the roars of non-human things, many of them. She wanted to see what this world really looked like. "Yes, please," Saiko said without hesitation. From what she'd seen in the live stream earlier, she trusted Dinessa's strength and had no fear for her safety. Dinessa pinned the demon to the ground, bent her knees, and launched herself lightly onto a nearby rooftop. Saiko watched from below with an envious glint in her eyes. When, she wondered, would she reach that level? Chapter 187, Section 187. Dinessa had no way of reading Saiko Busujima's thoughts. She reached the highest point of the rooftop and scanned the city below. Towers rose like mountains, houses packed tightly together, an urban sprawl larger than any she had seen before. In the distance, she heard a deep, sustained roar, and a black mushroom cloud climbed into the sky. Most of all, the streets and alleys teemed with creatures. Their faces, bellies, and limbs were marked by torn wounds. As an experienced demon slayer, Dinessa recognized the marks as bites. She recalled how Saiko had performed during their earlier encounter. Saiko was stronger than ordinary people, but compared with the thief they had met before, she still fell short. With a general sense of the situation, Dinessa leapt down from the rooftop. "Are those things everywhere out there?" she asked Saiko, who stood watching the walking horrors. "I haven't been outside recently, but I think so," Saiko replied, withdrawing her gaze and shaking her head. "If anyone's going to push back, they'd have to organize survivors, or find the virus's source and make an antidote. But to even realize that, they'd have to get their lives stabilized first," she added. Saiko thought it unlikely. With no authority left to suppress chaos, and many people enjoying the lawlessness, how many would be willing to try to restore the old world? No wonder the thief had been paying attention to this. Dinessa sighed inwardly at Saiko's lack of hope. "I'll head back for now," she said without further comment. "If there's a chance, we'll meet again." Saiko didn't stop her. This had mostly been an experiment. Later, she'd have to report to the others. As she watched, a white vortex shimmered, and Dinessa's figure and the demon with her vanished. At that moment, heavy footsteps sounded from inside the house. Shizuka Marikawa burst out into the courtyard, golden hair bouncing, surprise on her face. Her smooth, pale feet landed on the wooden boards. The cold underfoot made her toes curl, a mix of youthful charm and mature poise. "Busujima-san, were you talking to someone just now?" she asked, tilting her head. "Nothing," Saiko said offhandedly. It wasn't that she distrusted Shizuka. Rather, Shizuka's trusting nature made it too easy for her to blurt things out. That could be a problem later. It was better to keep her in the dark when necessary. "Have you finished your training today?" Now that the immediate danger had eased and supplies were abundant, Saiko planned to improve Shizuka's physical conditioning. She didn't expect Shizuka to fight, just to be able to run if needed. "Ah, did I finish it or not?" Shizuka murmured, glancing away uncertainly. Saiko watched her in silence. "No way. It hurts so much when I move." Shizuka protested, pinching at her chest in a plaintive way. She'd been rushed here and was still wearing Saiko's clothes. Nothing fit properly, not even her underwear. It wasn't comfortable for exercise. Bear with it a little. I'll find something for you later, Saiko said, rubbing her forehead with a touch of helplessness. She was well aware such discomfort wasn't trivial and made a mental note to ask Doma Umaru to get proper clothes. Are you planning to go out? Shizuka asked, alarmed. The occasional explosions and shouts from outside had filled her with dread. The outside world felt like hell. I'll be fine, Saiko said calmly. I won't take any unnecessary risks. I'll just stay put then, Shizuka insisted, rushing to reassure Saiko that she didn't want her to go. Saiko reached out and patted her to soothe her. Relax, I have my own way of handling things. You'll understand later. Dinessa's mission was over. She stood over the demon she'd confronted and smiled. She had seen too much that could not be told to others. There was no leaving this creature alive. The demon, still dazed, made a sound and lunged at her, but Dinessa didn't listen. Her greatsword flashed in an arc and the monster was cleaved in two. The blade, forged from some strange material, didn't splash with blood. Dinessa sheathed it casually on her back. I'm back, she announced when she returned to the village. Claire, who had been watching anxiously, threw herself at her. Dinessa, why did you disappear just now? She demanded, grabbing Dinessa's clothes with both hands. Let's talk while we walk, Dinessa said, taking Claire's hand and leading the way. Claire bobbed her head eagerly and followed closely. As Dinessa explained what she'd seen, Claire's small face registered shock and disbelief. Villagers who had only just buried a demon were peering out at the new arrivals. Rumors spread fast. Why is there another silver-eyed greatsword? One muttered. She looks fiercer than the last one. Is there a demon here too? Or is she here to collect money? Because Dinessa had helped them kill a demon free of charge before, the residents no longer showed the initial wariness they might have reserved for someone new, despite the pointed long ears that made her seem almost demonic. Excuse me, what was the previous greatsword like? Inelli asked calmly, a strange light flashing in her eyes as she listened. Section 188. She had felt a demon's presence rising from this direction. That was why she had come this way. She never expected to meet a greatsword who'd been cutting down demons across regions. On this island, the four corners were distinct. North, west, and south were each occupied by a demon who had once been a #1 greatsword and had awakened. These demons were terrifyingly powerful. Even the organization avoided provoking them. That was why the three in the corners had earned a singular name, the Abyssal Ones. Fortunately, the three Abyssal Ones seemed to fear one another, so none of them had ventured beyond their domains. They remained within their own regions. The organization itself held the east, and it had divided the remaining territory, excluding the three corners and the central holy city, into 47 regions, each defended by a greatsword. It was rare for one greatsword to cross into another's region to hunt demons. She certainly hadn't expected to find one here. Her contact had told her #1 Dinessa had killed the thieves. Then, Dinessa stopped contacting the organization and was judged a defector. Inelli had thought over the fact that she had not sensed any greatsword's demonic energy nearby, and a single image kept coming back to her. Long, wavy golden hair, a smile on her face, and a little girl following behind. When Inelli, herself a greatsword, asked, a villager gave a brief description of Dinessa. They were ordinary people. To them, all the greatswords were part of the same distant, feared order. They didn't linger on the details. As I thought, I didn't expect she'd come into my region, Inelli murmured to herself. The image of the smiling woman who cut down demons gave her a sudden, pounding headache. If she could avoid confronting that woman, she would. Dinessa's strength was unfathomable. Even Inelli, once #2 and now #3, found it difficult to contend with her. Dinessa didn't even need to release demonic energy. Which way did they go? Inelli asked without changing her expression. We're not sure, the resident said, shaking his head, then walked away. Though Dinessa had saved them from a demon for free, the villagers' prejudice against greatswords ran deep. They hadn't followed to see which direction she'd taken. Inelli watched the man go and glanced up at the sky. If Dinessa had defected from the organization, why would she still hunt demons? Why would she be traveling with a little girl? All of it left her uneasy. Better to inform the organization first, she decided. Swallowing her doubts, she set off toward the village's edge to find her contact and report in. She had already been ordered to hunt Dinessa. Now that Dinessa was in her own region, there was no need to rendezvous with the other greatswords at the meeting point. Chapter 115, Harem Declaration. It's confirmed. It's possible to travel with a demon. And it doesn't seem to harm them, right? Why are you phrasing that as a question? The girl sounded puzzled, even though the experiment had just taken place, because the demon had its limbs severed and its mouth sealed first. Everyone in the group inhaled sharply at Dinessa's words. Still, thinking that demons lived by devouring humans, they weren't overwhelmingly disturbed. Domomaru. So even if it feels uncomfortable, it can't say anything? After all, it couldn't speak, so it couldn't protest. That's exactly it. Will it react after returning? Natsume asked after a moment's thought, no accusation in the tone, only curiosity. At worst, it would be another experiment. Aside from the shock of seeing the portal, it seemed stable. Recalling the demon's stunned expression after returning, Dinessa answered, Kirigiri Kyuko. Demons are stronger than ordinary humans, but before a world-traveling portal, they're probably not that different. Kirigiri had been watching silently and now offered her assessment. Based on that, she suggested there might not be a problem. Of course, the safest thing is to test again, preferably with evil people, like bandits. When it came to the safety of people they cared about, caution was warranted. At least it proves the portal doesn't block non-chat group members from crossing. Domomaru, if Sally and the others knew, their faces would be priceless. Doma immediately smiled wickedly at the thought of how shocked their friends would be to learn they weren't from the same world. It would be wonderful to actually meet them. They had been together for nearly a month, and their ties with Shiramina Risa had grown close. Doma Umaru, a gaming expert in her own world, often lost in PvP against Shiramina Risa, but kept challenging her, unwilling to admit defeat. She saw Risa as both rival and good friend. Meeting in person would be a delight. Butterfly Kane. You all sound like you're talking about something amazing. Butterfly Kane had just finished resting and brightened at the conversation. How was your rest? After returning from that other world last night, Butterfly Kane hadn't appeared, and Natsume was curious. I slept for a long time, much needed. She sat on the veranda of the Butterfly Mansion, hands resting on the wooden floor. Her eyes were soft as water while she watched Tsuyuri Kanao in the courtyard staring blankly at a butterfly. Kanao wore a cherry blossom yukata cinched with a thin obi that suggested her shape, her exposed skin like a lotus emerging from water. Her long black hair was still damp, and Shinobu gently combed it. With Kibutsuji Muzan's death, a weight had lifted from Kanai's heart. The years of strain relaxed, and she finally let herself unwind. She hadn't rested the night before and had traveled a long distance. She hadn't even bathed before collapsing into deep sleep. Waking left her oddly unmoored. Her days had always been for training, treating comrades, or carrying out demon-slaying missions. Now Muzan was gone. The other demons were gone, and the Demon Slayer Corps had no missions. Its members wouldn't be injured anymore. For a moment, she didn't know how to spend her time. Seeing the chat group's discussion brought the reality back. Muzan had been eliminated, but Natsume Yuu's curse hadn't been lifted. There was still work to do. That's good. Not knowing exactly what Butterfly Kane was thinking, Natsume replied softly. Since everyone has discovered the portal's function, there's something I want to say. Section 189, Butterfly Kane typed into the group chat. It's only a small token of gratitude, but I hope everyone can come over tomorrow. Master would like to host a banquet to thank you all. She hesitated, then added, Kirigiri, if you have time, you're welcome to join too. Oh, Doma Umaru's eyes lit up. She wasn't usually a foodie, but an invitation from the Ubuyashiki family, the house that had supported the Demon Slayer Corps for 1,000 years, meant there would be excellent food. Yotsuya Miko looked embarrassed. I didn't do much. Is it really okay? Saiko Busujima frowned. As Miko said, it feels a little awkward. Natsume Yuu replied quickly. The Ubuyashiki family has been around for 1,000 years. It's perfectly fine, even if you bring Hanari. The girl in the classroom suddenly covered her mouth and stifled a laugh. Her shoulders trembled. The male teacher above fixed his heavy gaze on her. Miko sat up straight until his stare passed, then turned her golden eyes toward her friend, Hanari Yurikawa, defensive. "That's too rude to say about Hanari," Miko snapped. Sorry, Natsume Yuu answered. "I was only joking. If you have time, just come, together." Chitanda Eru blinked in surprise. "You seems unusually cheerful. Why is that? Could it be because of Miss Kanai?" Doma Umaru guessed. Kato Megumi added, "A gentle, very well-built older sister. How could any boy refuse?" Kanai's whole body stiffened at those words. Her cheeks flushed red. Shinobu, standing behind her, noticed immediately. "Sister, are you all right?" "Cough. No, I'm fine," Kanai forced out, trying to suppress the pounding in her chest. Shinobu didn't press further. After learning that Kanai possessed something inside her that could span worlds, she already had a good idea of what was happening. In the courtyard, Tsuyuri Kanao tilted her head, watching her adoptive sister. Fresh from bathing, Kanai's face had gone a deep, tempting red, like an overripe apple. Kanao smiled faintly to herself and returned to the chat. Natsume Yuu continued, "That's only part of the reason. It's not just Kane. You're all beautiful. As a man, I can't help but be interested." He didn't try to hide his thoughts. In a group like this, secrecy was pointless. Saying it openly felt better than letting it fester. Kanai felt a quiet relief. Natsume Yuu was the only man in the chat. He was exceptional in both ability and appearance, and it was only natural he'd draw attention. Still, she didn't want the group to become awkward over it. In her era, polygamy wasn't unheard of. Hashira Uzui Tengen had 3 wives, but in the world where Doma Umaru and the others came from, such things were generally unacceptable. Those remarks surprised Doma Umaru and Yotsuya Miko. "As expected," Doma muttered. Kato Megumi thought of Shiramina Risa and another acquaintance and shook her head. Chitanda Eru, from a prominent local family, had heard of powerful men surrounded by many women. It was a blow to her romantic image, but not entirely outside her acceptance. "Wow, that's a bold thing to say," Doma exclaimed. "If you say that out loud, people will think you're a scumbag," Miko protested. Natsume Yuu was unbothered. "It's not the number of partners that's the issue. The real problem is not being able to face what's in your own heart. Strength comes from the heart. If you can't face yourself, you can't grow." Seiko Busujima shrugged. "Only outstanding men will attract many women. I'd rather my man be admired by others than not. It means I have good taste." As a traditional Chongying woman, she was almost proud of that. Miko was incredulous. Seiko can accept that. Seiko replied calmly, "Why not? Rules are meant to protect peace, but my world is in ruins. Even if peace is restored, nothing will go back to exactly how it was." Those words hit the modern-era girls like a jolt. For them, the idea of accepting a man who didn't love only one of them felt wrong, but Seiko's experience made them reconsider. It wasn't just about how many partners a man had, it was about whether he could truly hold only them in his heart. The group fell quiet for a moment. Kirigiri Kyuko finally spoke, measured and direct. "You said that was only part of the reason before. Is there another?" Natsume Yuu answered plainly, "I want to spar with Dinessa and see my current limit. The last time, Kibutsuji Muzan was too weak. I couldn't really test myself." He wasn't trying to show off for the girls. Years of illness and training had taught him to control the power in his body so he wouldn't hurt others. But he still didn't know the full extent of his abilities. In his own world, releasing his full strength even once in the wilderness would cause a huge upheaval. In Kanai's world, that kind of disturbance wouldn't happen. Chapter 190, Section 190. Natsume Yuu wasn't worried that Dinessa would refuse. She was a warrior at heart, and her fighting spirit was fierce. "You want to fight me?" Dinessa's brows lifted, and her silver eyes widened in surprise. The last time she had accepted a challenge was when she surpassed the former number 1, Rosemary. Rosemary had reached the brink of demon power and was about to awaken as an abyssal one. She sent a black letter asking for a duel. Even after awakening as an abyssal one, releasing only 10% of her demon power and turning her eyes gold, Rosemary was cut down by Dinessa. So receiving another challenge now left Dinessa momentarily stunned. Then she thought of the potential the challenger had shown and the full power he had kept in reserve. A surge of excitement rose in her chest. "I accept your challenge," Dinessa said. When she spoke, the the corner of her mouth lifted. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to use her full strength. The freedom of swinging a greatsword without restraint, the shiver when two blades meet, the rush of blood, the razor-edged danger of skirting death by a hair. This smile was different from her usual one. It carried the scent of peril. The edges of her silver pupils seemed to glow as if molten lava burned there, nearly turning them molten gold. Demon power pulsed inside her like a restrained beast, ready to roar. If a greatsword had been standing by, one would have seen her adopt the stance of releasing demon power. Even Claire, an ordinary person, could sense it. Dinessa's normally gentle aura had sharpened into something like a blade. Merely looking at her felt like pricking 1,000 needles. Did someone in that chat group say something that made Dinessa happy? Claire asked, looking up. She could feel how high the person before her was keyed. Dinessa suppressed the pulsing demon power and summarized the chat. Someone with decent strength wants to spar me. Fighting Dinessa, a human? Claire's eyelids lifted. A hint of surprise crossed her otherwise expressionless face. In her understanding, demons were things humans could not defeat, and greatswords were figures even above monsters, great hunters of demons. Dinessa ranked first among those few fearsome individuals. That a human was challenging her struck Claire as an act of remarkable courage. To the young Claire, another world was no more foreign than walking alone to a distant village. It was simply daunting. Her thoughts were written plainly on her face, so Dinessa merely smiled and said nothing. Some things are hard to believe until you see them. These two are going to spar. This could be interesting, Kikyo, drying herbs at home, murmured, her slender brows lifting. She had no plans to go at first, but the idea of witnessing different cultivation styles piqued her curiosity. You two are going to spar, Doma Umaru blurted in the chat. Will anything go wrong? Chitanda Eru asked, suddenly anxious as she thought back to the speed and force each of them had displayed. If they weren't careful, something could happen. Natsume Yuu replied in the group, having fused with the demon bloodline, my recovery is on par with Kibutsuji Muzan's. Even if my head were cut off, I wouldn't die. He clarified quickly. He wasn't like Muzan, sprouting multiple heads and hearts. It was simply that his life force allowed him to preserve vitality for a time even with mortal wounds, enough to reattach a severed head and recover. Although I am primarily offensive, Dinessa added, as long as my vital points aren't severed, I won't die. Demons and those infused with demon flesh and blood heal quickly. Lost limbs can mend with demon power. She wasn't worried. Yotsuya Miko read the exchange and frowned. This sounds like they're fighting to the death. Butterfly Kanai, sitting on the veranda and staring up at the sky, put her hands to the floor and sighed. I was just planning to invite you to dinner. How did it become this? Natsume Yuu could only laugh. After that, the others resumed testing the teleportation gate. It took several hours to get clear results. People transported through it were unharmed, and the gate itself could not be damaged by attacks. Strikes passed through as if the gate existed in another dimension or was an illusion. Kirigiri Kyoko proposed a thought experiment. If an enemy's body were halfway through the gate and their ability to pass through were cut off, would the body be severed in two? The result was no. Instead of being sliced, the half-entered body would be rejected by the world, bounced back as if expelled. Kirigiri felt a twinge of disappointment. If the gate could inflict damage like that, some unbeatable foes might be neutralized. But she also feared the opposite risk, an enemy slipping cleanly through, and so she abandoned the idea. The next evening, the Demon Slayer core base buzzed with activity. Chapter 191, Section 191. Members of the Demon Slayer Corps had changed into civilian clothes, determined to leave the past behind. They wandered the estate with bright, relieved expressions. The courtyard in front of Kagaya Ubuyashiki's house was especially crowded. Along with the Ubuyashiki couple and the 6 pillars, Butterfly Kanae and Tanjiro Kamado, his forehead still marked by the flame-like sigil, stood among the assembled guests. How is he? Kagaya asked softly, looking kindly at Butterfly Kanae. Compared to the fragile figure from 2 days before, he was different now. The red mark on his forehead had faded, his eyes glittered with renewed light, and an unmistakable vitality seemed to have returned. With Kibutsuji Muzan's death, The 1,000-year curse on the Ubuyashiki family had begun to lift. Recovery would not be instantaneous, but the decline had stopped. "They'll be here any moment," Butterfly Kane replied, having just checked the chat group. No sooner had she spoken than the air in the courtyard rippled. White motes spun and swirled until they formed a bright, whirling vortex. A moment later, Dinessa stepped through, a greatsword slung over her shoulder and long, golden waves of hair framing her face. A little girl clung to her cloak, Claire, eyes wide and curious as she took in the unfamiliar sights. Everything about the place, the clothes, the buildings, struck her as ornate and delicate, like things only wealthy city folk would own. She kept her distance, half afraid to touch anything and get scolded. "They're so pretty," Claire murmured as she slipped her hand into Dinessa's cloak and turned toward Butterfly Kane. Butterfly Kane crouched to Claire's level and smiled gently. "These are comrades who fought beside me and our master." She then introduced the others briefly. "I'm Claire," the girl added, flat-faced but polite. "Oh, so they came too," Claire said, expressionless but observant. Dinessa only smiled, and then another portal opened. More figures emerged, one after another, filling the courtyard with chatter and new faces. Yotsuya Miko's voice rang out, surprised and delighted. "Kyoko, your outfit is so mature." Kirigiri Kyoko, who had joined the Future Foundation, had traded a school uniform for a sharp black suit. Her demeanor was unchanged, arms folded across her chest, purple eyes calm, and assessing the scene without emotion. "I'll be heading to Towa City later, so I prepared this over the past 2 days," she replied. Chitanda Eru scanned the crowd and smiled widely. "Now we're all here at last," she said. "I thought you might bring Sally and the others." Doma Umaru lingered near Natsume Yuu, peering at the dissolving vortex with a small, disappointed frown. "I wanted to frighten them a little," she said. "Since this is our first proper gathering, it's kind of better if it's just us." Natsume Yuu smiled at her. Since the chat group could travel between dimensions, there was no particular reason to keep it a secret. He had only chosen not to mention it yet. He'd planned to tell Shiramine Risa and Honju Kade later, but for a first get-together, it felt right to surprise everyone. "Really? You care about it that much?" Doma's flaxen hair gleamed in the late sun as she grinned up at him. Chitanda drifted closer, glancing briefly at Kagaya and the others. None of them looked angry, merely amused and observant. That didn't mean they couldn't be reproached later, she thought with a small, playful look. She stuck out her tongue in a quick, teasing manner at Natsume Yuu. The tip of it caught the light and gleamed in a way that made the moment oddly buoyant. Kagaya Ubuyashiki stepped forward, hands folded serenely. "I am Kagaya Ubuyashiki. Welcome, everyone." His voice was gentle and warm. He introduced the others standing with him, Sanemi Shinazugawa and the rest, before turning to Natsume Yuu. "I am Natsume Yuu. Thank you for the invitation, Master Ubuyashiki," Natsume said. His introduction shifted some gazes. Claire, still holding Dinessa's cloak, studied him intently. "This young man is not ordinary," she observed. Tanjiro Kamado, who had been told about Natsume's strange breathing and his uncanny ability to learn techniques, felt the same curiosity. Seeing him in person, Tanjiro recognized a curious blend, an unassuming posture that could, when necessary, erupt into overwhelming power. Kagaya, having heard stories of the Infinity Castle and the young man's ability even to learn Blood Demon art, felt impressed as well. He took a few quick, discreet glances. This was not the time for a long appraisal. After Natsume had introduced himself, names were exchanged in turn. Doma Umaru and the others offered thanks for the invitation and promises of a good meal. There was no wasted formality. Once brief introductions were finished, Kagaya led the assembled group toward the house with a gentle smile. "Oh, so decisive. I thought he'd say more," Doma murmured to Chitanda from behind, amused as they followed the others inside. She had expected to stand there and listen to the ceremony for a little while, then a calm voice whispered in her ear. Doma Umaru started and turned. Kato Megumi was standing beside her, serene and watching the crowd as if the words that had just been spoken hadn't been hers. "When did you get here?" Doma asked. Chitanda Eru's mouth parted slightly, purple eyes widened in surprise. Kato smiled faintly. "You didn't even notice your friend. How heartbreaking." It was hard to tell whether she was teasing or serious. "Sorry," Doma blurted, then hastily clasped her hands and bowed. I forgive you. I was here the whole time. Kato brightened. I missed gaming a little. This was only their third meeting in the flesh. Doma still wasn't used to Kato's elusive air. Chitanda glanced at her with curiosity. According to the files they had compared earlier, Kato's presence should have been weak but not non-existent. Yotsuya Miko, who had drifted closer, nodded along. Kato tilted her head. It started after my breathing technique shifted. I named it void breathing. They all reacted at once. Void breathing? The three exchanged incredulous looks. That's a bit too simple, Doma complained. Won't it cause problems? Could it affect your life? Chitanda, concerned, added, if you space out in class now, the teacher might not even notice. Kato laughed softly. She didn't mind. The anonymity she'd had before meant this felt little different. You says it's a recent change and I haven't adjusted yet, she said. Once I master it, I'll be able to appear normal again. She looked toward Natsume Yuu as she spoke. That's good. Yotsuya exhaled in relief and rubbed her chest. While the four of them talked, the garden opened up into a far larger courtyard. A crowd had already gathered. At once everyone turned to stare. Kagaya Ubuyashiki stepped forward and spread his hands toward Natsume Yuu and the others, his voice carrying clear and strong. These are the people who annihilated Kibutsuji Muzan. A roar of thunderous applause swept the courtyard. Faces shone with gratitude as eyes locked on the group. Yotsuya Miko immediately wanted to hide her face. She hadn't done anything to deserve this attention, and the flood of gratitude made her flush with embarrassment. Kikyo remained composed, almost aloof. As a Miko, she'd often been thanked after exorcisms. Public gratitude wasn't unfamiliar. Dinesa's silver eyes darted across the crowd. As a greatsword, she had always met villagers' looks with fear or disgust. They had never looked at her like this. A strange, uneasy warmth crept into her chest. She thought of how the townspeople would react if they knew she bore demon flesh and blood. It would probably turn to revulsion again. Claire, standing nearby, read the change in Dinesa's expression and squeezed her hand in comfort. Feeling the warmth, Dinesa looked down and met Claire's worried eyes. A small, grateful smile tugged at her mouth as she returned the squeeze. More quietly, she thought about Natsume Yuu. He had uploaded the files. He must know what a greatsword was and what it meant. Yet when Dinesa met his gaze this time, she saw no trace of judgment, no hint of discomfort. Having endured so many hostile stares, she was acutely sensitive to any negative emotion, and she felt none from him. That steadied her somewhat. Around them, whispers and exclamations rippled through the crowd. Those were the ones who destroyed the Ghost King? I heard their strength surpasses even the pillars. They're so beautiful. Their clothes are unusual. Is that a Miko? Butterfly Kane's chat group, a cross-world communication channel, was a closely guarded secret within the core. Only the pillars, Kagaya Ubuyashiki, and Kane's sister knew of it. Ordinary members were not told. If too many people learned of it, the secret could leak, and after Muzan's death, with demons gone and the core's single purpose fulfilled, some might try to take whatever treasures Kane had. For safety, Kagaya had forbidden the pillars from spreading word of the group, though he had not restricted the Butterfly Sisters. Shinobu, standing among the crowd, scanned the small party thoughtfully. She'd heard her sister mention the members of that chat group and had a general idea who they were. Her eyes fell on the lone young man in their midst. The only male must be that genius my sister talked about, she thought, surprised at how young he looked, almost her age. For a month of training, he could stand against former pillars. He had already invented new breathing techniques that had turned the tide for the Demon Slayer Corps. He could defeat Kibutsuji Muzan with ease. Shinobu had heard all of it. Those stories shut down her urge to compete and left only one burning question. How strong were these people, really? Sister said they'll have a sparring match later. I should watch carefully, she murmured, remembering what her sister had told her the day before. Lost in thought, she didn't notice at first that Natsume Yuu had turned his gaze toward her. His pale purple eyes were clear and bright like jewels. Shinobu felt a private flutter, such beautiful eyes, then caught herself and did not look away. She forced a small smile. Even if she was weaker than he was, she wouldn't lose face in front of her sister. You're Shinobu, aren't you? Natsume said, the resemblance to Butterfly Kane helping him place her instantly. He returned her smile with a polite nod, then quickly glanced at the stoic girl beside her before withdrawing his eyes. Applause broke out and rolled through the hall, only dying down when Kagaya Ubuyashiki lifted a hand. "Please, everyone, take your seats," he said softly. "Please enjoy yourselves today." Kagaya's smile was gentle as he looked over the gathered members. After this meeting, the Demon Slayer Corps would disband. The soldiers assembled here would scatter. Whether they would ever meet again was left to fate. This might be their last gathering. A hush passed through the crowd. They had come together out of hatred for demons, but in the years of fighting, they had formed bonds with the comrades who had faced life and death at their sides. The thought that they might never see each other again made many of them dim. Emotion spread like fire. Those who had been lively minutes before grew solemn, and a few wiped at eyes that were suddenly wet. Chitanda Eru sensed the sorrow and asked in a small voice, "Why is everyone so quiet?" "It's like being sad after graduation," Natsume replied, his head bowed. Chitanda fell silent, but before the mood could settle, a booming voice cut through the tension. Hair like a blaze, Rengoku Shinjiro laughed and threw his arms wide. "We won't stop until we're drunk. We'll knock you all out. When it comes to drinking, even a pillar won't beat me. No one's escaping." Voices joined his, and people cheered. Kagaya only smiled. He was not angered by the interruption. "I have prepared enough sake," he said calmly. "Long live Master," the crowd shouted in return. "Let's go inside," Kagaya said, nodding at Natsume and the others as he led the way into the main hall. Once everyone had taken their seats, the banquet began. Small, exquisite courses were placed before them one after another. "Wow! Kaiseki!" Domo-Umaru's eyes lit up. Kaiseki, small in portion and refined, is prized for its freshness. It is usually prepared to order to preserve its delicate textures, rare fare for students. "My wife made the arrangements. The upcoming dishes won't require long waits, so please enjoy," Kagaya assured them. He had sent Amane Ubuyashiki to organize the kitchen when the guests arrived. With many chefs on hand, there would be non-kaiseki dishes as well, so nobody would be left waiting. Claire stared at the sashimi on her plate, surprised, and then watched as Domo-Umaru reached out and ate it raw. Claire's eyebrows rose. The texture looked exquisite, but was raw fish really something you just ate? "You can try it," Natsume said gently, noticing her hesitation and smiling. He knew Claire and Danessa were from worlds where such food was unknown, so he took a seat beside them. Claire hesitated, then copied Domo-Umaru's motions. Having never used chopsticks, she fumbled and finally used a nearby fork to spear a slice. She dipped it in the dark green paste, closed her eyes, and popped it into her mouth. A moment later, her eyes shot open, her mouth gaped, and her face flushed bright red. A sharp, clearing heat hit her sinuses. It was only wasabi, not foreign mustard, but to Claire, who had never encountered that flavor, it was overwhelming. For a heartbeat, she wanted to spit it out, but she had been unable to fill her stomach for so long, and this was fresh meat, so spitting it out was impossible. She chewed hastily and swallowed. "It's a strange taste, but not bad," she said at last, recovering and smiling at Natsume. Course after course flowed onto the tables. Claire ate until her mouth felt oily with richness. In her life, she had never had the chance to eat so heartily. Even Danessa, who normally ate little, ate out of curiosity at the fine presentation. Natsume felt little surprise. The ingredients were genuinely fresh. Kagaya must have spent freely to secure them in this era. The seasonings weren't as varied as those in a later age, but the food was still delectable enough to call it delicious. The toasts kept coming. During the meal, members of the Demon Slayer Corps filed in one after another with cups of alcohol, raising them to Natsume Yuu and his group in thanks. They were ordinary people, no special strength, no treasures to give, so this was how they expressed their gratitude. The feast stretched on for more than an hour. When everyone had finished, Natsume Yuu and the others did not head back into the barracks. They had come for another reason, a spar with Danessa. Sanemi Shinazugawa and a few others, curious, accompanied them outside. The rest of the corps, still lingering over their food and drink, were not told. This spar was for the fighters, not a public show. "Shinobu, why are you here?" Butterfly Kane asked, eyes on her younger sister. Since the banquet began, Shinobu had been watching them closely, the the moment they stepped out of the hall she had followed. "Sister, I want to watch their match too," Shinobu said, hands folded together, earnest and defiant. She refused to accept defeat. Knowing her body was weaker than a man's, she had chosen a different path to slay demons and had always admired Natsume Yuu. She wanted to surpass him. Kane sighed softly, already guessing her sister's thoughts. She glanced at Tsuyuri Kanao, who had silently followed them, and felt a fresh headache coming on. "Then let's go together." Natsume Yuu didn't mind. A couple more observers wouldn't matter. Kane offered a gentle warning to Shinobu. If the gap in strength wasn't too large, it could spark fighting spirit, but if it was too great, someone with a fragile will might crumble under the pressure. "Regret?" Shinobu murmured, puzzled by the caution. Kane didn't elaborate. No explanation would matter until Shinobu saw it for herself. Tsuyuri Kanao listened in silence, her expression still, then turned her calm gaze to Natsume Yuu and Dinessa. The pillars who had accompanied them, recalling their confrontation with Kibutsuji Muzan and the oppressive aura they'd felt then, also watched with interest. Yet remembering how Muzan had seemed like a toy in front of Natsume left them uneasy. None of them knew how far the battle's disturbances might reach. Himejima Jome led everyone up into the back mountain to a familiar training spot, a broad clearing beside a winding, gurgling river that kept the air humid. "How about here?" he asked. Natsume Yuu scanned the area and nodded. He had no special requirements. He simply didn't want to fight where people lived. There would likely be damage after this spar. Dinessa agreed without complaint. "Claire, stay here with them," Dinessa said, glancing toward the girl. "Dinessa, Natsume, good luck." Claire, having eaten with them earlier, was already comfortable around the group. Doma Umaru flashed a perfect smile and took responsibility for watching her. "Leave Claire to me," he said. "Be careful. It's just a spar. Don't go too wild," Kanai reminded them. Natsume Yuu didn't respond beyond a nod and moved to the center. Dinessa's white cape fluttered, and in a single breath, both of them were 100 meters away. "Such speed, worthy of someone who defeated the Ghost King," Shinobu said, astonishment plain on her face. She was quick and agile herself, but their movement was a pace she could hardly match. "Being surprised now is still too early," Doma Umaru observed, watching the pair with bright, eager eyes. Shinobu's gaze drifted to a girl with long flaxen hair, her exquisite face fixed intently on the distant figures as if she did not want to miss a single detail. Around them, several pillars watched with grave interest. Even the usually aloof shrine maiden showed something closer to curiosity. All these reactions shifted Shinobu's mood subtly. "Aren't you going to use a weapon?" Dinessa asked when she saw Natsume unarmed. The night before, he had displayed astonishing swordsmanship, each cut and thrust clean and precise, like a net wrapping a self-destructing demon. Had they wanted to finish that creature completely, she suspected he could have done so, and even she wouldn't claim to be able to outshine him with a blade. Natsume did a quick, economical warm-up, then stood still, smiling lightly. "Actually, I'm more skilled in fist and foot techniques." Chapter 195. Section 195 weapons couldn't be carried around freely in that world, so the first thing he learned was unarmed combat. Martial arts from schools across the country were openly available on the internet, and Natsume Yuu wasted no talent. He learned them all, mastered them, and fused them into his own style. No matter the angle, he could use the simplest, most direct method to unleash the full strength of his body in an instant. Because of that, he had become extremely knowledgeable about human musculature. By observing an opponent's eyes, aura, and footwork, Natsume Yuu could predict the direction of their next strike, much like his perception in the transparent world. "Is that so? Then I won't hold back." Sensing she wasn't being challenged in jest, Dinessa drew the greatsword from her back and spoke seriously. This opponent was unlike any she had faced. His aura was faint, almost ethereal, and evasive. If she weren't watching him with her eyes, she wouldn't sense him at all. He might as well have been a tree or a patch of weeds. That made him all the more difficult. Dinessa's greatest skill was detecting demonic power to anticipate attacks, and now that sense had been neutralized. For the coming fight, she could only rely on combat experience. Far from discouraging her, it only sharpened her resolve. "I'll start with a 10% release of demonic power." As she spoke, Dinessa's pupils constricted into vertical slits. Her silver irises darkened to a molten gold, as if stained by flowing lava. In the dim mountain light, her golden eyes flared. Pressure rolled through the forest like a tangible thing. Everyone nearby felt their hearts tighten as if the air itself had thickened. Before they could react, powerful demonic energy, mixed with a chilling fighting intent, rose into the sky and detonated outward as a shockwave, sweeping the fallen leaves aside and exposing the damp earth beneath. Chirp, chirp! Countless birds cried out and took flight, sensing the danger. Snakes, insects, rats, even ants scurried away as if driven by the same panic. Demonic power? Kikyo's expression changed as she fixed her deep eyes on Dinessa and frowned. The aura resembled demonic energy. No, is she a half-demon? Careful sensing confirmed Kikyo's suspicion. Her gaze turned complicated. As a shrine maiden, she might have sealed or eliminated Dinessa on the spot, but from the records she knew not all demons were evil. Some sided with humans. She also didn't understand the state of Dinessa's world, and acting rashly could be a mistake. She decided she needed to ask Natsume Yuu about Dinessa later. Suppressing her doubts, Kikyo looked to Natsume instead of immediately striking. Then she noticed the struggling breathing of those around her. She lifted her fair hand and poured out spiritual power. A white barrier blossomed and enveloped everyone on the field, shielding them from the surging demonic energy. What power? Kato Megumi raised a hand to shield her eyes, surprised. The chi produced by her basic breathing technique let her sense the demonic surge. Compared to it, the chi inside her body felt like the light of a firefly against a full moon. I knew she was strong, but not this strong. Saiko Busujima's purple hair fluttered as astonishment lit her deep blue eyes. Amazing. Yotsuya Miko reached to protect Claire, her voice full of shock. That was only 10% of her power. Chitanda Eru, whose senses were already keen and enhanced by the basic breathing technique, even heard Dinessa's voice. Butterfly Kanai and the others nearby showed their surprise as well. They all knew Natsume Yuu had come to spar with Dinessa and that she was powerful, but none of them expected that 10% of her strength would be unbearable. This aura far surpasses Kibutsuji Muzan. Himejima Jome murmured in shock. He didn't fully grasp what 10% meant, but understood she had not used her full force. He could only shudder at how terrifying she would be unleashed completely. Is this really a human's power? Shinobu muttered in disbelief. Even from over 100 meters away, the aura made her uneasy. Her gaze swept to Kikyo. The shrine maiden had created the barrier. Kikyo's strength might be considerable too. 10% of her demonic power, and she didn't hold back. Natsume Yuu watched Dinessa with a faint smile. Blood pumped through his veins like a drumbeat. His body warmed rapidly. Black, tree-like patterns crept across his forehead. His physical limits had already been pushed far. His pale purple eyes were gem-clear and deep, seeming to see right through everything. A thunderous blast shook the forest. The ground split as if struck by a heavy hand. Yotsuya Miko and the others felt the vibration under their feet. In the blink of an eye, the two figures in the distance vanished and reappeared almost on top of each other. Dinessa moved forward. Natsume Yuu's eyes were calm and deep as he registered the subtle changes in Dinessa's muscles and the expression in her gaze. Chapter 196, Section 196, Bullseye. The point of attack flashed into his mind. Natsume Yuu twisted his ankle and adjusted his forward motion. As he'd predicted, the heavy greatsword came down with merciless lightning speed. The sheer force tore the air, wrapping the surroundings in a roiling energy that warped his vision, making the blade look twisted as it descended beside him. Boom! Where the greatsword struck, the ground split open. A surge of power roared forward like a long dragon, carving a furrow through the earth. A huge tree, as thick as a water bucket, exploded as if struck by a sledge. Shards of wood flew everywhere. A section of the trunk vanished as it gave way and began to fall. The airflow was shredded, sending a painful pressure through the air. A high, piercing roar rang in his ears. Still, Natsume Yuu's eyes didn't change. He closed the distance on Dinessa. A greatsword is a medium-long weapon. Effective use requires getting close. That single downward blow hadn't seemed to be delivered at full power, yet it had caused terrifying damage. Riding the momentum, Dinessa followed by slashing horizontally. Natsume Yuu's eyes were sharp. He stepped his right foot forward as the earth caved and burst. He clenched his right hand into a fist like a hammer and smashed down. His fist met the edge of the greatsword exactly. Clang! A muffled ring echoed through the forest. Invisible ripples spread outward. Waist-high grass bowed and fell, bark flaked from trunks. Even Danessa felt numbness in her hands from the mountain-splitting, rock-cracking force transmitted through the blade. The greatsword almost flew from her grip. "My strength is being suppressed." The instant their weapons met, a judgment flashed through Danessa's mind. Even through the greatsword, she could feel it. If she were hit directly in this state, she might not be able to withstand it. Yet the vibration stirred her blood. Her energy surged. Her fighting spirit flared. Yoki liberation, 30%. Her yoki shot up, and a geyser of aura burst forth. Her delicate face pushed forward, faint blue veins appearing, though she still held her human form. As her yoki rose, her fingers, which had begun to loosen, tightened around the hilt. The sword that had been tipping downward lifted again. Feeling the force of the greatsword beneath his fist, Natsume Yuu turned his hand into a palm to support the blade. Using that leverage like a spring, his body snapped upward. Level with Danessa, he twisted his wrist and waist, then swung his left leg in a horizontal arc toward her head like a battle axe. The air screamed as the strike cut through it. Danessa reacted in an instant and heaved her arm up to block. Bang! Leg met arm. The very air could not bear the force and erupted into visible waves of energy. Danessa didn't give everything she had. She planted her boots and dragged deep furrows in the ground, suddenly skidding back dozens of meters. Boom! Natsume Yuu dropped from the air and didn't pause. With the roar of the earth underfoot, he pursued. Danessa braked hard, stopping her retreat. The two became streaks of lightning slashing at each other, locked in fierce combat. Danessa's strikes were broad and brutal. The greatsword moved so fast it seemed a silver moon in the air, tossing the atmosphere into chaos. Leaves were ripped up by the gusts, whirling and shredding into dust as they neared the duelists. The heavy momentum of each blow rolled like distant thunder for hundreds, even thousands of meters. Natsume Yuu's gaze stayed steady. His hands alternated between tight fists and open palms, striking exactly on the blade, deflecting the sharp edge. The slashes that missed him struck the ground in roars, kicking up a thick dragon of dust. When the dust settled, a channel over 100 meters long had been gouged into the earth. After releasing 30% of her yoki, even a casual slash from Danessa could leave such scars. At this moment, both strength and skill were laid bare. The battlefield trended toward the mountain. Wherever they passed, rivers were torn, trees within 100 meters crashed and fell, leaving only scarred earth and crumpled trunks in their wake. The air was heavy with the odd metallic scent of upturned soil and crushed foliage for a long while. So strong. Shinobu swallowed hard at the sight of the moving devastation. Now she understood why her older sister had warned her. Even though he'd only been training for a month, he possessed this level of strength and talent. Chapter 197, Section 197. It felt completely out of reach. Even imagining a contest with him was hard to summon. Beyond raw strength, the techniques he displayed were astonishing, moves the other had practiced for years without mastering, yet he executed them with effortless precision. Seeing that he was almost the same age only deepened the pang of dejection in his chest. Is he really this strong? Butterfly Kane hadn't expected such growth in under a month. Natsume Yuu had become far more powerful than she'd imagined. Is this all of their power? She murmured. Uzui Tengen stared at the crisscrossing afterimages and couldn't hide his surprise. Their speed and force blurred into one another. He couldn't track them well enough to block a single strike. They held back when facing Kibutsuji Muzan? He wondered aloud. Himejima Jome felt the earth tremble beneath him and a soaring fighting spirit swell inside. He was stunned. No, they haven't tapped their full strength yet. Kikyo watched with steady eyes and spoke calmly. Despite the ferocity of the fight, everything remained within a controllable range. She could sense that neither combatant had reached his peak, and most tellingly, Natsume Yuu hadn't released his full energy. They're still not at full power, she confirmed. Yotsuya Miko blinked at Kikyo, disbelief written across her face. The aftermath of the clash, scattered rocks, splintered trees, would have leveled a building in her world. They moved like walking weapons, and still, this was not everything they could do. The thought kept her heart racing. Humans could actually reach this level? Claire, held protectively by Doma Umaru, watched with wide eyes. She had expected the duel to be like fighting demons, over in an instant. She never imagined a stalemate. Their fists could shatter stone tablets. Their footsteps cracked the earth. One more human like this, she thought, and Dinessa would have helped. A strange light flickered in her gaze. She had a rough idea of the danger around them, and even if she could not fight, she did not want to be a burden. "They're gone. Should we follow?" she asked. Doma Umaru peered toward the mountain where only the roar of battle remained. From the echoing sounds, she pictured the escalating clash. She would have liked to see it, but without Kikyo's protection, it would be reckless to approach. She remembered that before the fight began, Dinessa had released only 10% of her demonic energy. Even that made breathing difficult. If Kikyo hadn't spoken up, Doma Umaru wouldn't dare leave the outer barrier. "Let's go," she said. Kikyo, whose interest had been piqued, nodded and led the way. The barrier shifted with her as she walked forward. Kato Megumi and the others fell in behind, moving quickly. Down at the base of the mountain, the commotion did not go unnoticed. Members of the Demon Slayer Corps spilled out of their houses and turned toward the rear slopes. Smoke and dust curled into the sky like dragons, trees toppled as if struck by giant blows, and the path to the mountaintop looked scoured clean. "What's happening up there?" someone shouted. "Charles, has a god gotten angry?" another speculated. A few believed only a deity could cause such devastation. "It sounds like fighting," someone else said, and others with keener ears picked out the ring of steel among the thunderous noise. "Are there still demons?" "What kind of powerful demon could make such a mess?" someone breathed. "Kibutsuji Muzan is dead. Are there demons stronger than him?" The questions tumbled on, heated and endless. Some wanted to investigate. After all, Kagaya Ubuyashiki lived nearby. Even as the corps disbanded, they could not ignore his safety. "Everyone, quiet down," Kagaya called gently. He had not gone with the others, and his gaze was fixed on the cleared trail up the mountain. Inside, he was shaken by the display of power, but he was also grateful. It was by such strength that Muzan had been defeated. "Master, have the pillars gone to check?" someone asked, moving closer. "It's just two distinguished guests sparring," another replied, and the explanation reached Kagaya's ears. He kept his composure and reassured them softly, though the scene below was hard to reconcile with the word sparring. "This is sparring?" murmured someone in astonishment, thinking of the devastation that would have torn the mountain apart. If they didn't know their master well, they might have felt insulted. "Master, can we go and watch?" called a swordsman, tempted by the spectacle. A battle like this, who could pass it up? Food and comfort faded in importance. Kagaya's gentle gaze swept the group. When others spar, they choose secluded places. "They do not wish to cause a fuss," he said. "Besides, even if you can see from here, getting closer could be dangerous. It's better to stay put and enjoy the food." A few were disappointed, but understood. If the fighters were truly that powerful, wandering off to watch would be a needless risk, death for the sake of curiosity. One by one, they returned indoors, though their eyes kept darting back toward the mountain, as if they hoped the walls might give them a better view. Chapter 198, Section 198. They are truly amazing. They are. Amane Ubuyashiki walked to her husband's side, looked up at the distant battle, and could not help but exclaim. Even from here, the intensity radiating from the mountain was palpable. It was impossible to imagine what it would be like up close. Thankfully, luck is finally on our side this time. Kagaya Ubuyashiki smiled and reached out to gently stroke his wife's swollen belly. According to Kanae, the butterfly, this time she would bear twin daughters. They would no longer be bound to the duties of the Ubuyashiki household. They could live freely and choose their own paths. He and his wife would finally have the chance to watch them grow. Yes, we must thank Kanae properly. Feeling his hand, Amane gave a fond, maternal smile. "It's quiet. Could it be over?" At that moment, the uproar on the mountain subsided, and Kagaya tilted his head with curiosity. On the ravaged mountaintop, Natsume Yuu and Dinessa stood facing each other. Heat radiated from their bodies, and faint white vapor rose from their heads. The soil around their feet churned up from the battle, had dried instantly. Natsume tore off his tattered clothing, revealing a perfectly sculpted body. Dinesa's battle attire remained intact, made for fighting. It bore up to the strain. A fanatic grin pulled at the corner of his mouth as he discarded the last of his torn garments. His body was finally awake. He relished it. He cracked his neck until it popped and clenched his fists. This level isn't enough. Dinesa's golden vertical pupils flashed. The greatsword's demonic power had limits. Once those limits were crossed, she would transform fully into a demon. The critical threshold was 80%. Past that point, there was no turning back. The real battle begins now, Kikyo said in a deep voice. She had tracked them and stopped at a distance. Those with her inhaled sharply, eyes locked on the fighters, unwilling to blink. Natsume exhaled through his teeth, lowered his stance, and the ground beneath him split with a boom. The restless energy that had simmered inside him since the fight began poured out all at once. His black hair lifted in the sudden gust. A faint white mist enveloped him, and the already turbulent airflow became chaotic. Trees that had not been uprooted wailed in the wind. Countless leaves fell and were swept up into the vortex, forming a long green dragon that circled above them. Chi release, 50%, someone shouted. Dinesa's golden pupils shone brighter. Her demonic power, which had been climbing through the battle, rose another notch. Her features twisted further. Teeth sharpened, veins stood out on her face, the nails of the hand gripping the greatsword grew jagged, and her fair skin lost its sheen. Another deafening explosion rocked the area. In the blink of an eye, both fighters vanished from view and then reappeared at the center of the blast. A fist wrapped in crackling chi met the greatsword as it howled through the air. The ground beneath them shattered into a web of cracks from the force of the collision. The impact spread outward like a tidal wave, swallowing the terrain. 50% still isn't enough. Let's go further, Natsume barked. Feeling the surge of power and the greatsword being driven back, Dinesa's grin widened. Her demonic power spiked at an astonishing rate. That brief, terrifying transformation was the only clear image Shinobu and Tsuyuri Kanao would remember afterwards. The two fighters moved with blinding speed. The punch tore through the air like a freight of thunder. Where it struck the ground, a vast pit was carved. The sword slash blew outward, slicing the stream below. Water was cast aside, and the dark riverbed revealed itself. Dinesa's aura surged, her body contorted into something ferocious and monstrous. Natsume's chi and blood flowed hotter and freer. His breath raged like a fire dragon's. The chi gushed from him as if without limit. Their eyes, pale purple meeting molten gold, locked with nothing but fighting intent. With that look, any lingering concern Dinesa had about her appearance melted away. The mountain seemed to cry out as if a giant beast churned beneath the earth, shaking it continuously. Birds and beasts screamed and fled. The air became a maelstrom under the pressure of their collision. The landscape itself seemed to warp. Waves of sharp impact rolled outward as if to swallow everything nearby. The protective barrier over the watching crowd flared clearer and brighter. Kikyo had to bolster it in response. Even those who had sheltered indoors lower down the mountain, hearing the increasing roar, came out to watch. This time, Kagaya did not stop them. "Natsume, he's getting stronger," Kikyo said. "What does that mean?" Sanemi Shinazugawa asked without turning his head, staring at the duel. Kikyo did not hide anything. In her perception, Natsume's energy should have reached its limit long ago, but it hadn't. Instead, as if in response to Dinesa's terrifying demonic power, his own limit had broken. A continuous stream of chi surged from within him, reaching levels he shouldn't have been able to reach. "You calls that chi," Megumi Kato explained, surprise coloring her voice. Even she could not keep her composure. "Does that mean you is growing during the battle?" Saiko Busujima asked, turning to Kikyo. Fire in her eyes. She was a swordswoman captivated by the power being unleashed. "That's right," Kikyo confirmed. Kikyo nodded at Saiko Busujima's words. When she spoke, the crowd fell silent. The shock in their faces only deepened. No one cared how long the fight had lasted, only that the sun was beginning to set, and the light had lost its brilliance. As the murmur died away, everyone suddenly realized the battle was over. The people at the foot of the mountain felt their shock deepen. They stared at the opposite peak as if they were gazing at gods. The entire summit had changed before their eyes. A bare path now cut across the face of the mountain. Faint crisscrossing gouges could be made out, and the very top looked as if some colossal maw had bitten a chunk away. The peak sat noticeably lower than before. "Is it over?" Kirigiri Kyoko murmured, staring at the two who no longer fought. Even she, usually unshakable, felt the impact of what she'd just witnessed. "Yes." Kikyo's voice was steady. The aura of hostility in the air had not vanished entirely, but it had dropped from a deadly peak. She motioned to the two combatants and then lifted the barrier that had enveloped everyone. Her eyes lingered on Danessa. The demonic power that had clung to her moments ago was still strong. During the fight, her features had gone feral and her human presence almost faded. For a time, Kikyo had feared the woman had truly become a demon. But now, with the battle ended, Danessa's humanity returned with surprising speed. "Danessa is incredible," Claire exclaimed and ran up to greet her. Doma Umaru and several others followed quickly. Only the demon corpse pillars and the butterfly sisters remained apart from the crowd. Kikyo's question. Butterfly Kanai scanned Natsume Yuu from head to toe and found no injuries. "The gap between ordinary people and prodigies is terrifying," she said, glancing at her sister. Shinobu shook her head, a rueful expression on her face. She had trained relentlessly for years. The other young man had reached what felt like a natural disaster's level in a single month. There was little hope of catching up. "Sister, how do you feel about that?" Shinobu asked Kanai. Were they not intimidated to be near someone who had felt almost inhuman? Kanai smiled helplessly and tapped her chin. "At first I was shocked. After that, I just accepted it. I don't intend to try to compete with him." Shinobu had hoped for some clever plan, but there was nothing to be done. This was simply the reality of the gap. "All right," she said, and they moved toward the rest of the group. Kanai reached out and patted Tsuyuri Kanao's head, and Kanao followed, curiosity flickering in her calm eyes. "Wait!" Shinobu called as she hurried after them. As they drew near, someone asked loudly, "Who won?" Domumaru's curiosity reflected the crowd's. They had all watched an earth-shaking clash and wanted to know the victor. "It was just a spar," Natsume Yuu answered with a casual smile. No winner was decided. He had deliberately not used his greatest advantage, his ability to learn an opponent's movements and exploit flaws. This time he had come to test himself. His fight with Danessa had been raw strength against raw strength. Fists and the greatsword colliding in a brutal contest. His internal chi had been almost entirely exhausted by the end, and he could tell Danessa had held back too. Her demonic power had been high, but it hadn't reached its critical threshold. That restraint was expected. It had been a controlled sparring match. "Ah," Yotsuya Miko said with mild disappointment. "No winner this time, but I can feel it. I won't be far behind Natsume for long." Danessa had slung her greatsword over her back. Her silver eyes regarded Natsume with a measured intensity. Even she had felt his acceleration during the fight. Every punch landed heavier than the last. He was growing at an almost monstrous pace, from an ordinary person to the figure before them in only a month. The thought that in 10 days or 2 weeks he might leave her far behind, even to a level beyond what an awakened being could handle, made her frown in unease. Kato Megumi, seeing the battle had ended, decided not to linger. "I should head back," she said. "Me too," came other farewells. Chitanda Eru, cheeks flushed, glanced discreetly toward Natsume. It was the first time she had seen a man's torso, his fair skin, the perfect lines of his musculature like sculpture, the faint masculine scent. Her sensitive senses reacted, and heat rose to her face. For a moment, she was embarrassingly flustered, though curiosity won out. Doma Umaru and Yotsuya Miko were similarly affected. Saiko Busujima, Kikyo, and the others, older and more composed, seemed unperturbed. "I've got things to deal with in Towa City tomorrow, so I can't stay long," Kirigiri Kyoko said calmly. As farewells were exchanged, Natsume watched Danessa. The fight had taken a lot out of her. Even at number 1, her stamina and demonic reserves were taxed. He suggested, "Danessa, why not stay here tonight? Don't go back in this state." Going back exhausted could be dangerous. A pursuing greatsword, or someone like Priscilla, ranked number 2, could pose a real threat. The lesser ranks, number 3 through number 5, would be manageable, but Priscilla's raw potential made her unpredictable. Danessa considered his words with a thoughtful tilt of her head, the weight of the evening's fight still in her shoulders. Because of Dinessa's obsessive nature, if she were to awaken the way she had in the original story, especially after a major battle, she would be utterly defenseless if anyone were careless. Natsume Yuu understood that, so he didn't press the issue. Claire didn't object either. As long as Dinessa stayed with them, she could remain wherever was safest. Then we'll be imposing, Dinessa said with a smile to Butterfly Kanai, watching everyone's faces. Her demon power release a moment ago had not been small. Her body had shown visible changes. She wanted to see who had noticed and whether they would react the way the locals had. Butterfly Kanai put a hand to her cheek and returned a soft smile, curious about such a powerful woman. Natsume had mentioned that his world had man-eating demons, but he had kept the specifics private. Butterfly Kanai didn't press. "We'll trouble you again later," Natsume said. Saiko Busujima and the others, who had been preparing to leave, suddenly froze. Eyes turned toward him. Butterfly Kanai blushed like an apple at first, remembering what Natsume had said earlier. Her thoughts turned to chaos. Uzui Tengen and the others noticed the sudden fluster and grinned. This young man drew attention, and their short time together had shown him to be pleasant company. They let the moment pass. "I gained some insights from the battle and discovered my shortcomings," Natsume continued, calm and even. "Tomorrow's a holiday, so I need to sort things on the mountain. I'll leave first." Doma Umaru muttered a quick word and dashed through the portal. Chitanda Eru and the others didn't say anything. They stepped through as well. In an instant, only Natsume Yuu, Dinessa, Claire, and Kikyo remained. Butterfly Kanai's expression froze, and she kept her gaze away from Natsume. Shinobu and Tsuyuri Kanao watched their sister curiously. This was the first time they'd seen her so shy. "You go down the mountain first. I'll rest a bit and then go back to change," Natsume said after glancing at the silent Kikyo. The others nodded and left. With the crowd gone, Natsume turned to Kikyo. "Now that no one's here, is there anything you wanted to ask?" Kikyo looked him straight in the eyes, clear and steady. "Is she a half-demon?" "In a sense, yes," Natsume replied. "More precisely, she can wield demon power." He was not surprised. From the moment they joined the group, he'd suspected as much. One was a Miko who exorcised spirits, the other a greatsword who used demon power. Misunderstandings were bound to arise. When they'd faced Upper Moon 1 and 3 the previous night, Dinessa's released demon power had been under 10% and had not dissipated, so Kikyo had had no reason to notice. In the battle just now, however, Dinessa had released her power without restraint. It would have been odd if Kikyo hadn't felt it. Kikyo's expression remained calm and serious. "Is she good?" "She is." "She doesn't eat people?" "No." Their answers were simple and firm. They held each other's gaze for a long, wordless moment. The clarity in their eyes was almost like looking into a mirror. Finally, Kikyo broke the stare and spoke softly. "If you want to know more, I suggest you ask her yourself." "With her personality, if you ask plainly, she won't hide it," Natsume added. The details were Dinessa's privacy, and asking about them without permission would be disrespectful, even if the person asking had no ill intent. Natsume knew greatswords worried about the presence of demon flesh or blood inside them, and he could understand Kikyo's concern. After a moment's thought, Kikyo shook her head. No need. Knowing that Dinessa wouldn't harm people was enough for her. The why of Dinessa's power mattered less. Kikyo hesitated, then said what had been on her mind. "Perhaps my usual techniques won't work on her. If that power isn't truly hers, over time, it could erode her body. If it can't be removed, it must be made part of her, turned into her own." She had felt a dissonance in Dinessa's power. It had not resembled the typical traits of half-demons. The change had been total, like the beginning of a transformation. Given that their worlds differed, Kikyo could not be certain, but she sensed that Dinessa's demon power had been acquired by unusual means. Without waiting for an answer, Kikyo opened a portal and stepped through. Watching her go, a faint smile tugged at the corner of Natsume Yuu's mouth. There had been no outward display of worry on her face. Yet she had offered a practical solution. Tsundere, he thought lightly. He shook his head as his thoughts drifted back to Dinessa's liberated form and the fact she had not been able to use her full strength.